WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. We're coming to you from Star Communications Channel 16, also simulcast on WCLN Radio with a summation in the Sampson Weekly newspaper. My name is J.W. Simmons, and I'm glad to be your host for this show. And today we have a very special guest, somebody that I've been looking forward to having a conversation with, met some time back, and thought he would bring him in to talk to you. His name is Dr. Mason Fuller Smith. Mason, you graduated from a little college we call north of Sampson County here, the University of Campbell.
Yes.
And you got your degree there in Christian ministries, and you got your master's from another school that's well recognized here in North Carolina, Master's in Divinity from Duke University, and also got your doctorate from Columbia, the Columbia Theological Seminary. And the thing that it just interests me is that you grew up in a very similar area of what I did right here in southeastern North Carolina, in Columbus County. And again, I met you a few weeks back, but it was amazing to me. I hadn't known you before because you've traveled everywhere.
Right.
You're known by, a lot of folks would say you're a master storyteller. You're known both locally, statewide, nationally, and internationally to a degree in a lot of your storytelling, the way you go about things. But now you found a place that was right there in your same county that you've ended up, should I say, back to a place called Boys and Girls Home at Lake Waccamaw. Tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up, should I say, right next door to one of the largest Boys and Girls Homes that I know of around, 148-acre campus there.
Well, the little farming community I grew up in is often affectionately known as Hogwaller. But it's just a couple of families in a little area right on the county line, and then we moved to Whiteville. So being in Columbus County growing up, I really grew up with Boys and Girls Homes kids. Some of the kids went to our church. Several of them were involved in a scout troop, and so we would see them at camporees and different things like that. But it's kind of one of those experiences where you know about something, but I had no idea really the extent of what Boys and Girls Home meant until I was living in Raleigh. I was still a student, about to have my first kid, and was looking for an opportunity, and someone just mentioned to me, well, have you thought about Boys and Girls Homes? They've just built a chapel, a beautiful multi-million-dollar facility, second really only to Duke Chapel in my mind in terms of beauty. And so I looked into it, and I was beside myself with the amount of services, with foster care, adoption, the way they were caring for kids, the mission, the heart that they had to provide kids a place, and fell in love with it instantly. And served there for several years as the first chaplain, and had the opportunity to perform my very first baptism was right there in Lake Waccamaw with the fishes and the alligators swimming by.
Wow.
But you know, life moved me away from there, traveled internationally, served a lot of other agencies and ministries. But I think there's something about the need that kids face and the way Boys and Girls Homes was approaching that need, and the belief that every kid deserves to be loved, that every kid deserves an opportunity. That gets into your DNA. It really changed me as a person and the way I see children, the way I see opportunities for caring for children. So I always wanted to come back, always wanted to have some avenue to come back, but it just never quite panned out until Gary Green, who was doing what I'm doing now, he retired. He retired to do a honey-do list that's become a novel. And so it was his time. Everybody said, you know, Mason, nobody can replace Gary Green. And I heard that even before Gary retired. You know, Gary's going to retire soon, but nobody can replace him. And so when he finally did and this opportunity presented itself, I called President Gary Faircloth at Boys and Girls Homes. He said, well, now who are you? And I said, nobody. And so that was the open door for me to come back and really was thrilled to do so and to be doing what I'm doing now, which is essentially just telling their story. Their story is worth hearing. They deserve to have it told. And so I travel all over the state. I talk to civic clubs mostly, to other organizations and churches, and just try to tell what's going on in the lives of children today.
Well, and this is kind of a natural thing for you as director of civic and club relations. It's kind of fits your personality, what you appear to be, what you enjoy doing, to message what's going on there. I want to kind of just to get us on track, particularly about Boys and Girls Home. The vision of that organization struck me, and it's to be a leading human services provider addressing the ever-changing needs of children and families, led by people of excellence and compassion. So let's talk about that 140-acre campus, and then I want to kind of weave the children into that, because obviously the reason you're there is the children, the reason the campus is there is the children. But 140 acres, that's a lot of land mass. But the more I read, the more I see there's a lot going on there.
There is. One of our sayings is that beauty is a silent teacher, and you can't ask for a more beautiful place than Lake Waccamaw. Lake Waccamaw is the largest natural lake from Florida to Maine that's got such a diversity of life. And our campus sits in a pecan grove. It's actually one of the largest pecan orchards in the state. At one time had hundreds and hundreds of trees. We've lost many of them over the years, and we're in a replanting process. But that beauty of the orchard, the lake right there next door to us, the way we manicure and keep the place, it creates, I think, a different mindset for the kids. They've gone from some place that maybe it was very dirty, very ugly, very hard, to a place that's soft and beautiful and full of life and growth, and it has an effect on those kids. Our campus is sort of divided by Sam Potts Highway, and so on the residential side, we have all our 9 cottages set up kind of like a little village, and at the top of the hill is the chapel. Across the corner is the Thomas Academy, which is our North Carolina State charter school that gives kids an opportunity to learn, but also vocational education. So we're using that space to teach them culinary arts and woodworking, welding, auto mechanics. And then across the highway is the farm, and it's a working horse farm. We have an enormous Benton Arena is there where we have horse shows every weekend, rodeos. Kids have the opportunity to learn about horse care, to do equine therapy, to be able to brush a horse down, to learn about pecans and how they grow. And it just gives them a different environment, a different opportunity, and the opportunity to work too, to realize that, you know, I can work hard and earn a little bit of money, and I get to use that freely. I learn how to invest it. So we're really doing adulting on that campus, and just living that farm life, I think, is everybody ought to work on a farm at least for a week in their life.
I think that if there's anything builds character, having grown up on a farm as you did, I think that does it. And also it helps me respect that I didn't want to be there, so I ended up doing something else. I think that happened for me on a tobacco patch, and many times I've talked to folks about that. The interesting thing is when we talk about these children, and I know you've had a lot of soul searching on this, how do we end up with so many children in need of a place to go that is brought into this world and suddenly realize there's nothing, and they have to end up, and some of them never get to Boys and Girls Home, which is probably even sadder than the fact that they have to be taken to Boys and Girls Home. We're blessed to have Boys and Girls Home, but how do we end up with a society that ends up with their children in a place like this?
You know, kids today are not any different than kids were 20 years ago when I was first there, but they're facing some struggles, I think, that are new. I had opportunity, I was sitting across the table from our sheriff in Columbus County, Jody Green, and I just asked him offhand, I said, what's the #1 struggle we're facing in Columbus County? And, you know, he didn't have to blink opioid addiction. That's something new. We've always had drugs, we've always had alcoholism, but that has really changed families, changed neighborhoods. And so we're seeing today that kids, they're dealing with that with their parents, but they're also often addicted. That something about the morality and the structure of their whole community has been reshaped by that. Then at the same time, that's also meant there's less role models for those kids. There's less resources. You know, 50 years ago, even 20 years ago, if a kid was in sort of a bad home, chances are there was a strong neighbor or an uncle down the street they don't often have that anymore. And then when they look to media sources like their favorite music, their favorite television shows, everything is somewhat corrupting. It's teaching them a different moral, a different way of thinking about the world, and it's often really beating down their sense of hope and their sense of drive, their sense of self-esteem. One of the things that's affected is the kids today, I'm noticing, are really struggling with self-esteem. You know, there's that self-esteem and anxiety, and then you add social media to that, to where you cannot ever really escape it. And so, and even kids in poverty have got, they've got Snapchat, they've got Instagram, they're tweeting out things, they're texting each other, people are recording things and shaming online, and that's creating that sense of hopelessness for kids. So kids, on top of all that, are facing what they always face and what we've always dealt with, which is something called ACEs. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yes. But it's adverse childhood experiences, which sounds a little too soft to me, really, to describe what it is. But for those who don't know what ACEs is, it's essentially, there's like a basic 10-point chart of things like, has someone in your home had drug addiction or alcoholism? Has somebody served prison time? Were you physically assaulted or sexually assaulted at some point? And most people will score, or many people will score at least one, whether that be a parent hardship or poverty or a death in the family. But many kids that we're serving in impoverished communities, in broken homes, they're coming to us with 6 and 7 and even 8 of those experiences. And it's not like just one moment in their life. This was stuff that's happening to them daily. So that I'm painting a picture for you of layers of complication that's creating this social situation that we have here in North Carolina. So what do you do?
One of the things we're going to do right now is take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about ACEs. That's an acronym that I have mentioned a number of times, and I want you to kind of explain how you deal with that at Lake Waccamaw. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. Call a friend, stay tuned. We're talking about a very important subject, and that's your children.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We want to thank you for being with us today. Remind you can continue to reach us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Also, you can drop us a snail mail card or letter. Many folks do that, and that's to Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina 28328. That's to We Should Know, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina 28328. Today we're talking with Dr. Mason Fuller-Smith. Mason, when we went to break, I kind of went off the air with the comment that we're talking to you about your children, and I said your children to our listening and viewing audience. Lake Waccamaw Boys and Girls Home has a number of children there. You just explained the ACEs programs and the whole aspect of this layering of kinds of things. But in one aspect, when I look at that, I look at the idea of the collective responsibility falls on the entire space of humanity, because it might be a child we've never seen, but we have some sense of ownership in that.
Mm-hmm. I think that if you look at the cost of this development process for kids on society, it is everybody's problem. It affects, our jobs market. It affects our economy. It affects our ability to produce and create people who will create jobs and create technology and create medicines and those kinds of things. It affects who can even serve in the military. To kind of unpack that, I do want to say first that in addition to the ACEs and the other things that I was talking about, we talk about toxic stress and the effects that has on a child. When someone jumps out and scares you, you go into, you may remember from school, flight or fight.
Yep.
And that's a traumatic experience. But imagine you had a trauma like that all day, every day. It creates this sense of toxic stress, which actually rewires kids. It changes their whole brain mechanism so that even as adults, they don't think the way someone who grew up in a nice, safe, comfortable environment grew up. So that has lasting, long-term effects on our society. So when we say that they're our kids, we mean all of us as North Carolinians, as Americans, we have a responsibility for these kids, for our own kids' sake, for our future, for where are we going as a society if we don't sort of break these cycles of addiction and dependence and trauma and abuse and neglect. Otherwise, we're going to see what kind of future will we see in the United States? What kind of future will we see in North Carolina? Because it's way more rampant than most people think about. You know, often these communities are kind of hidden away. I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina as a missionary, and it always amazed people when they'd come to visit me. I'd take them down, you'd see the historic district, you'd see all the pretty houses.
Beautiful city.
But just go about 3 or 4 streets deeper, and hidden behind all that facade of beauty and history are extreme poverty, abuse, neglect, and hurt. And that's Charleston, but we see that in Columbus County, you see it in Sampson County, you see it in Bladen County, you see it all over North Carolina.
Is that kind of the footprint? You could find that, you could say, possibly in just about every city or town in the country?
Absolutely.
And in some of the larger areas, we find not only poverty, but we find street people, folks under the bridge. And for whatever reason, something happened to deter their forward movement, to deter their sense of achievement. Some of the things I noticed that you guys focus on there, and some of the core values is obviously one of them is safety, but the things that hit me was this idea of respect, empathy, genuineness. And when I think about those things, it's something that many folks probably just came up with and they had that. But a lot of folks that you're dealing with don't really understand what those words are, do they?
It always impacts children when they come to boys and girls homes, or if they enter one of our foster care homes, to find that there are people who treat other people with respect and love and dignity, because that's not the reality that they've experienced in their life up until that point. At first, it's actually a little bit shocking to them, a little jarring. And then they start to think, well, are there other people who can love? Are there other people? And you're around, and when you're surrounded by love and empathy and genuineness long enough, kids start to ask themselves, can I be a person like that? It gives them a different example, a different model to follow. I mean, this is at the heart and soul of part of Jesus's ministry, was to show us that you can live your life in society in a different way, with compassion, with love, with empathy for other people. And Thomas Academy has a motto. Tom Simmons, Dr. Simmons, who's our Vice President of Education, was one of our original boys. He was one of the early boys when it was just boys' home. He was told, for example, in his family, in his neighborhood, you're never going to make it. You're never going to succeed. You'll be lucky if you even get out of high school. Now he's, a successful educator. And from his experiences, he came up with this motto for the school, which actually impacts all of campus, the 3 C's. And the first one is connection. How do you connect to the world around you? How do you connect to your family, to your neighborhood, to your nation? Because when kids begin to realize their connection, they understand their purpose, and purpose gives them a lot of power. The second C is compassion. I think it's hard for adults to have empathy, but to really care about somebody else. But when you learn to do that, you really are transformed. It changes you, it benefits you. You can't exactly teach compassion, but you can give children opportunities to see it and to practice it. We, for example, have a lot of kids that help with a local feeding ministry. That's an opportunity for them to practice compassion. And then the third C is character. How do you become a person of integrity? Which really is about knowing what to do when there's not a rule to follow. Our kids, we could teach them rules, but if we don't help them become young men and young women of character, they really haven't changed any. They really haven't improved themselves. And so we're trying to break those cycles. For example, we have a teen mom home. It's called the Lake House. And at the lake house, many of those girls who often are victims of human trafficking, but more often they're just repeating a cycle that they've inherited from their mother of teen pregnancy, of dependence on other people, on the government, and teaching them that you can be resilient, you can be independent, and you can make a path for yourself that doesn't mean that you just keep having babies, that's your only purpose in life, that you have such a greater connection to the world around you. And we've seen those girls transform with that new reality. They've become nurses, they've entered into law enforcement, they've gotten high school diplomas, which is something maybe they're the first one in a couple of generations, or if ever, from their family to do that. So that's how all of that really does work to transform the lives of kids that are coming to us with this story and this label of being worthless, no good, you're a slut, you're a gangster, to hopefully leaving us, and that is our goal, is to get them independent and get them on their own, or get them back into a healthy family setting, whether that be someone in their own family or foster care or adoption, but to get them to a point where they see that reality for themselves in a different way.
One of the things that struck me as you were talking, I just made a little note here, is that this idea of a modeling, of children having folks around them that they can see as not only people of character, but people that model the right behavior. As folks are listening to us today or watching us on Star TV, talk a bit about how critically important that is for a child's life. And at what age do you typically see children observing things and acting out things? And the reason I ask this question, obviously, we have bullying issues in school and this kind of thing, but the other part of that is I hear folks oftentimes say, well, I don't understand why little Johnny or little Susie or what have you did A, B, C, or D. And it was brought to my attention, well, the reason they did that, they had to see someone else do it. Absolutely. Because they had no way of knowing that. So what do you say to parents? What do you say to others and what their role is?
Well, almost from birth, we are already able to model the behavior. I mean, how do we learn how to smile? We see others do it. We learn to cry, and children are always processing that, even at a very early age. They're looking at adults, trying to look for social cues for how they should respond, how they should behave. So we're teaching kids, even if we don't realize it. I used to have a coach in high school who said, you're going to lead one way or another. You can either lead by example or you can lead by your bad example. But people are going to follow you. They're going to see. And what I think that I'm learning, actually, even since coming back to boys and girls homes, is what an impact people can make on the life of a child without really having to have a skill or have any training. We call it Relate Strong. Mm-hmm. And on our campus, every employee is tasked and challenged to relate to our kids. So it's not just the counselors in the cottage, it's not just the social workers, it's not just the trained counselors who are working on the mental therapy, it's the receptionist, it's the guy who services the automobiles, it's the groundskeeper, it's everybody. And sometimes it's just as simple as every day looking that kid in the eye and saying, how are you doing? Or that's just telling that kid, I see you. It's modeling empathy and concern from other people. Think about how many times you walk down the street and say hey to somebody and they don't even acknowledge you. But we're trying to let them see that people matter to people. People should connect with each other. So relating strong, I think it teaches people who are listening, if they want to think about who are the kids that have been placed in your life that you can just relate to. You don't have to do counseling. You don't have to have a wealth of scripture memorized or some theological degree or be a minister or a social worker. But how can you just make a little positive impact in some child's life? For parents, I think it's a reminder to always be vigilant. What are we saying in front of our children? What are we doing in front of our children? What are we showing them?
We're going to take another break. When we come back from break, I want to kind of explore that a little bit and talk a bit about one of those core values too. And the word was used as concreteness, which I think is so critical into what the message is and what you guys are doing at Boys and Girls Home. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking about children. We're talking about those things that we say is the most important things in our world. We'll be back in a moment. Caller friends, stay tuned.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody trying to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on the air each and every week. We come to you at 2:30. We're also now at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday. You can pick us up on Star Communications Channel 16. As I've mentioned in the past, the program is aired on radio, Star Communications. There's a summation in the Sampson Weekly newspaper. That summation covers a bit or a portion of the show. It does not cover each and every subject we talk about, simply because there's probably not enough pages there to do that. We're talking today about that thing, that item in our lives, probably that all of us consider is the most important thing if we think about it, and that is our children, whether your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whatever, but those children are our future. And a person that knows about that and has seen it firsthand, that works in an environment and has seen it both nationally, statewide, and internationally, is Dr. Mason Smith. Mason, when we went off, you were talking about the importance of the behavioral kinds of things, the things that oftentimes we just take for granted with our children. Let's fill in that space a little bit, because quite often our frustrations as adults, or our behavior as adults as a result of our frustrations, sometimes reflect directly in that children. And I've heard that from public school teachers. You indicated your wife was a school teacher. Well, I've heard that sometimes from teachers in elementary school. If you really want to know what's going on, just listen to the children when they come in the morning. They'll tell you just about everything that happened the night before, or watch their behavior. Watch how they're dressed. Watch how they interact. Are they awake sitting in the seat at school? Mm-hmm. How do we deal with? How do we change that? How do we help folks understand it's not the child? Because you see parents, and I don't want to get on an expose here, but you see parents sometimes that will spank a child, and I'm thinking the child then turns around and hits her sibling, brother or sister, and then they have to get the child for doing that. Where did the child learn that from?
Exactly. How do you get a child to the point where they realize that there's other ways to act out your anger than physically or shouting? And we don't see much of that in our culture that's modeled in the first place. I try not to judge parents. That's hard in my position, because
I try to help them understand it.
But I say to them, that kid is, as we said, always learning. The human brain is the most programmable computer in existence. I mean, it is so easily molded and shaped. And like you said, if you want to know what's going on with kids, just listen to what they're saying that is affecting them and impacting them. When I was a youth minister, if I wanted to know what was going on with my teens, we'd take a van trip. And something about being in the driver's seat, they don't think you exist anymore. And they just start talking. Yeah. And you find that they are seeing things that are shaping them. On the other side of that, we were talking about ACEs and all the layers of negative impacts. How does a kid survive? How do we have kids like Dr. Thomas Simmons or Gary Faircloth, who's our president at Boys and Girls Home, was also a former resident. Many people have been successful. What's the difference for them? And what we use now to sort of gauge that, or the metric we use, is based on the resiliency scale. Things that are in a kid's life that can counteract the effects of the negative trauma. For example, have you had an adult that invested in your life? We were talking about Relate Strong. Mm-hmm. That really does have a measurable impact on a kid's ability to overcome all that negativity and have some hope, have some future. Not only has somebody invested, but do you have any family member, even if your parents are abusive, are you an uncle? Are you a cousin who can say, how are you doing? You matter to me. Mm-hmm. To take a kid fishing, things like that. Mentoring programs, were you ever the benefit of that? But there's something even more important and deeper that we really haven't touched on yet, and that's the spiritual component that can bring resiliency and hope. I was just reading, there was in 2019, there was the North Carolina Center for Public Policy and Research employed Elon University to do a poll of North Carolinians to ask them what's the most important issue that we're facing in North Carolina. It's probably not a surprise that education was at the top, but that's almost a cop-out. We always say, well, if people would just be better educated, then there'll be a better society. And there is a lot of truth to that. But we are also just entrusting another institution to better those children. Interestingly, further down was opioid addiction, poverty, things like that. But at the near bottom was spirituality. It's like almost not even a real concern. I would invert that whole list. I would say, above all of that, the spiritual component. Well, I mean, we know, hardwired for a spiritual connection of some kind, something outside of ourselves. And that the real hopelessness in those communities is the level of despair from the lack of spiritual connection. And that if you can get a kid to get on that journey, you know, that you don't want to dictate all their doctrines and their beliefs, but if you can get them to start exploring that journey, then they have some real hope for transformation. I always say, unless you change a kid's heart, you haven't changed them at all.
So it's almost like a comment I heard that if there's something wrong with the mechanism, i.e. the human being, a child or adult or otherwise, you need to refer to the owner's manual, and that would be the Bible. So we're saying that core structure, that book gives us the details of not only how to correct that, but fortunately, how to prevent that from ever happening. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Absolutely. When they were finishing the chapel windows, that was when I first came to Boys and Girls Homes, there was a lot of discussion about what are we going to do? We've got these 58 lower panels, and if you can kind of visualize the chapel as just having almost top to bottom stained glass windows, done by partly by Roland LeCompte, who did the windows in the National Cathedral, but also Salem stained glass out of Winston-Salem. And so there was a lot of ideas that were kicked around, and it just came to me one day. I said, I got it. 58 scenes. We kind of have Old Testament already at the top on one side and New Testament on the other. Let's start with a panel from Genesis and go through several stories from the Old Testament on the left, and then start with the gospel story, the birth narrative on the right, and end with Revelation, so that at that time, 58 weeks was about the average stay of a kid at Boys and Girls Homes. And what we did is every Sunday night, we took one of those panels, one of those scenes, told them that story, let them think about it, ask questions, explore it. So that at the end of 58 weeks, they've really had a crash course in Bible 101 and how that relates to their life, and how, whether they are a believer or not, they can benefit from those powerful meta-narratives in Scripture. And my favorite window in all is the scene from the book of Hebrews, the great cloud of witnesses. That's this image in the window of this sort of ethereal cloud of all these faces of people who've gone before us. And then kneeling is a small African-American kid in prayer with that image that there are all these people who've been where you are, kid. They know what you're going through, and they made it. And they're just cheering you on. They want you to succeed. You're surrounded by people right here in this community, right here in Lake Waccamaw, who are cheering you on and want you to succeed. That's powerful for a kid, because, as I said a moment ago, when they see that people believe in them, then they start to believe in themselves.
The whole concept of Boys and Girls Home is built on that foundation of spirituality. Is that a fair statement? Yes.
We're a Christian institution. We're non-denominational, but we have just learned, again, over the years, time and time again, that when that kid makes that spiritual connection, that's when real hope starts to set in, and you start seeing real, true transformation.
What is the range, and how hard is it, given a person's age, when they enter the facility itself, the campus? How hard is it? Is it harder for folks that are teenagers, or is it harder for folks that are younger to be kind of process and find themselves in a different environment and become settled and not be as anxious and not be fearful? How long does it take? You mentioned 58 weeks. How long does it just take them to get adjusted to where they are and why they are?
Well, they're staying in what we call residential care, which is our cottage environment. Usually has about 7 kids, and 2, we call them RCs, or residential counselors. It's a family type setting, and so in that we really don't want the kids to grow up in that. We want them to have as much normalcy as possible, whatever normal is.
Yeah.
We want them to experience that as much as possible. So the path that we often see for kids is they'll come to the residential program for 6 months to a year, somewhere around there, maybe a few years, to get, it's almost like a triage, to get a lot of those really heavy issues dealt with, to gain stability. You think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Absolutely. It starts with that physiological. Are they fed? Are they? And then you go into safety. Do they feel safe? Do they feel like there's a place where they belong? And get them essentially, to some degree, settled, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And we would love to see that kid go back into a home setting where maybe there's something that's changed in their home environment. We'd love to see that kid go into foster care. We do both family foster care and therapeutic foster care. We also do adoption. So a kid could take a path from residential to foster into a forever home with adoption. And because of that, we to date have had 0 failed adoptions. We offer that level of support. We created this program called Create Hope, too, because we saw not every kid is going to come to a place like ours. Not every kid that needs it will even end up in foster care. So Create Hope reaches into the community and offers advocacy, support, parenting training, counseling for the kids to help give them that stable family. So the paths really aren't not quite that black and white anymore of a kid coming to boys' home like they did 50 years ago, living there from 13 to 18 and then going off to college. Now we look at the kid and say, okay, where are they going to best be served? What's the path that's going to help them the most?
With that note, we're going to take another break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Dr. Mason Smith. We're talking about Boys and Girls Home at Lake Waccamaw, but a much bigger scope of that conversation is the importance of children in our life, for our future, for our world. We'll be back in a moment. Call a friend. Stay tuned.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We're coming up on our last segment here with We Should Know. Again, each and every week, if you just happen to be tuning in to the show today, this is the last segment. We're on for an hour from 2:30 to 3:30 on Tuesday, and then there's also a replay on Tuesday, Thursday at 7 p.m. on Star Communications Channel 16. We're talking today about a place, a location in North Carolina, in Columbus County, called Lake Waccamaw, called Boys and Girls Home. The fella that actually is trying to open that door wider so everybody can see in and understand what they're doing is Dr. Mason Smith. Mason, you've been recognized for a number of things. Of course, I think I mentioned your wife Kimberly and your 2 sons Wilson and Wesley. You not only have the position of academics to be able to talk about a lot of these subjects, but you've got the experiential background as well to talk about it, because I can relate to you raising boys, and that idea of the experience is interesting to me because you are recognized as internationally recognized as a storyteller about events. And I found one piece, I've got to get this in your bio that just struck me. Your 2 heroes. I like the first one, Jesus Christ, and I find the contrast amazing. The second one is Jerry Clower. Now, most people that's probably listening to the show knows exactly who Jerry Clower is, comedian and a personality that's been around for a long time. That's quite a contrast, but they both deal with human relations. Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity as a little kid to meet Jerry Clower. He came to our church in Bladenboro where we were attending at the time. It was sort of a surprise. Nobody knew he was going to be there, but he was apparently friends with Harold Shirley, who was the pastor at that time. And he struck me, his humor, obviously.
Yeah.
It was on point with my life and my experiences of growing up in rural North Carolina. But he also had this keen ability to make you think, about life in a different way. And one of the stories he told that really stuck with me and shapes me even now is he talked about how do you know right from wrong if there's not a scripture about it, if there's not a law about it. And he gave so many great points. The one that I always remember the most, though, is he said, if you have to ask, it's probably wrong. For example, he said, if I ask my wife in the morning, honey, is this shirt dirty? It's because I already know that it is. And I think that matters for people. People look at what's going on and with our children, with our schools, with our state, with our neighborhoods. And if you have to ask, is there something wrong? You know that there is.
You might better rethink that whole process.
Right, absolutely.
When we look at Boys and Girls Home, I want to make sure that folks know how to reach you. I want to make sure they know how to find out additional information. We have a lot of people that watch and listen to this show weekly, but oftentimes folks will say to me, well, I wish, could you talk more about so-and-so, or I wish you to ask this person this. The show's going, this again is the last segment. So how do they reach you? What is there, a telephone number? Is there a website? Some of the stuff that we could talk about today, we could do a semester on just covering the kinds of things you guys are involved in there. How do they reach you? Give us that information so they don't have to call back and try to get the radio station to tell them what phone number to call.
Well, they can certainly give us a call, 910-646-3083, and ask to speak to Mason. And we'll talk to you a little bit about what we're offering. We often get people who will call us and ask about foster care. They want to do something, but they don't know how to accomplish that. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of just unknowns for people. And what I always tell people is, give us a call and talk to us, because we offer an enormous amount of support for foster families. We don't just do what used to be done, which was, here's a kid, good luck, thanks for taking him. But we're in the home, we're doing well checks, we're doing counseling, offering counseling and psychological care to foster families. We're in the home offering them support through legal advice or legal support, advocacy, to really stand with them. We're in that journey with them. So people can give us a call and talk to us about that. You don't have to have a website. Just type in Boys and Girls Homes of North Carolina. We'll come right up on your browser.
Google it.
Just Google it.
Yeah.
Like everything else in this world.
Right.
You used to just not know things. Now you just Google it.
Yeah.
But I encourage people to look us up online, look through our pages. And then the best thing, that if you're really curious about Boys and Girls Homes, when you call me, just ask for a tour. Ask for us to show you around. Maybe you have a church group, or maybe you have a civic club that's never been on campus. Because we do talk to people all the time who really don't even know that we're there. We stand with really a gathering, a community of independent child care facilities throughout the state. And we ourselves have foster care facilities in several other locations like Raleigh and Fayetteville. So wherever you are, there's either Boys and Girls Homes or something like Boys and Girls Homes. There are many. So we can even help you find out where that place is. But we take kids from all over the state. So there's 100 counties in North Carolina. We've served kids all over. We have a girl in one of our programs right now from Colorado. So it doesn't matter. South Carolina, it doesn't really matter. We're willing to help you find the best path for a kid. If you want to be a part of that kid's path, foster care is not the only option. I mean, there are ways for your church, for example, to adopt a kid, to be a part of that kid's life. If you're in a civic club and your club hasn't been on campus or interacted with kids, every civic club in North Carolina has sponsored a cottage on our campus. So we have the Lions Cottage, the JC's Cottage, the Kiwanis Cottage, the Rotary Cottage, the Civitan Cottage. And those clubs, they become, it's theirs, it's their house. And they come and have fried chicken dinners with the girls or the boys in that cottage. And that's relating strong, investing. That's one more tick in that child's box of resiliency options, that someone has taken the time to travel all the way down to Little Lake Waccamaw and sit down and share a meal. at the end of the day, you can't get much more human than breaking bread with someone.
Absolutely.
You know, the phrase eating and drinking shows up in the Bible more than any other phrase. Because when you eat with someone, you're binding yourself to that person in a way. You're like, if you go into a restaurant and you see me sitting down with a politician, what are you going to assume? That I'm invested in that person, that I believe in that person. Kids will assume the same thing, that you're invested in them. So I tell people, come to our campus, look us up on the line, give us a call, and find out what you can do to help change a child's life.
They need to call 643-3083, 910-643-3083 to find out more about when a good time would be to come.
Right.
If they're going to the beach, they just want to go by and look at the campus, they can call this number.
Absolutely.
Somebody can set up a time when they're going to be there so they'll have access to the campus. Those kinds of things are freely done. And
don't just show up.
Yeah, exactly.
We're a safe campus.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's important to know. The other thing I think is, as I look at this whole idea of what goes on there, and you mentioned foster children, my understanding is there's a great need for foster care in this state, that the foster families, that a lot of folks could step up maybe if they would find out the details on that. How hard is it to find people that are willing to be foster parents?
There are a lot of people who have good intentions, and then they see what's expected of them, and they realize that that's more than they're able to do. So we do see that a lot. And a lot of people they're initially afraid of it and never explore more. So we're always in need of foster families and people who can provide respite care for foster families. That's where as a foster parent, you need a little break. The therapeutic foster care is even harder because that involves another level and layer of training and expertise. Those are people who are dealing with kids who have higher level behavioral issues. We also have kids that need to be in foster homes who have severe medical conditions, brittle bone disease. They got fetal alcohol syndrome. I had the opportunity to play Santa Claus at the foster care Christmas party, and what just broke my heart was holding this little baby with tubes in its nose, tubes in its belly. And a lot of people don't want to foster something like that. We have the beautiful, picturesque ideal. I want a little kid, a little baby, freshly born, that I can just shape and mold. That's beautiful, but there are so many other kids. And what about teenagers? What about that 15, 16-year-old who just needs a safe home, a place that'll love him? I was talking to a gentleman yesterday in Clayton, North Carolina, who he had a family member. They passed away. The three kids were sent to another family member who was abusive, and there was all kinds of issues with alcoholism. And the social worker just came to his door literally and said, "Will you take these kids?" And all his kids are grown. Wow. So we need people like that who are bold, brave, and compassionate.
There's a lot of children today, and you can read about this, you can see it in newspapers, quite often are being raised by their grandparents. In fact, we did a show here with the Department of Aging, grandparents raising grandchildren. It's become almost a norm rather than the example of something that's a little off center with that. It's kind of become accepted way to do business.
And I would tell people, if you have found yourself in that situation, that's another reason to contact Boys and Girls Homes, because we can help you with that. We can support you. We can stand by you with that through our Create Hope program. There are resources out there, and we're one of them. But a lot of times, people have not because they ask not. They don't know to call.
And that number, again, 910-643-3083. 646-3083. 646, ladies and gentlemen, 3083. 910-646-3083. Call if you have questions. Call if you're going in that direction. Call if you'd just like to make an appointment and take maybe your church family down and take a look at what's going on in the campus.
Absolutely.
Any last minute thought? We're about 30 seconds out.
The last thing I would add, if you are in Columbus County listening and you're looking for an alternative opportunity for education, our Thomas Academy is not just for Boys and Girls Homes. It's for the whole county, and our focus in that is small, focused, individualized education plans. Our class size usually don't get more than 10, 13 kids.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Dr. Smith, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. My
Mason
pleasure.
Smith has been our guest today. We talked about girls and boys home, but yet we did get into a conversation about some of the details related to adolescent behavior, why it happens. We look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time, and we also encourage you each and every week to stay tuned at 2:30 on Tuesdays. And as with that said, may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.